By the time I'm recording this video, the President of Russia on behalf of the Russian Federation has just officially recognized the two breakaway states of Luhansk and Donetsk in eastern Ukraine as sovereign republics. There is also talk that Russian troops are about to be deployed in these so-called republics for peacekeeping. Of course, it's really hard to tell what's actually going to happen next, but the fact that there are close to 200,000 troops around Ukraine makes it pretty reasonable to say that Russia may invade Ukraine in the near future. Russia, of course, has denied this from the very start, but the situation has been escalating more and more in the last few days. Actions speak louder than words, and I mean, you don't really prepare for a war unless you're actually willing to give in. In our eyes, Russia is the aggressor here. But I thought it would be pretty interesting to explore the reasons on why Russia would choose to consider invading Ukraine. Not to really excuse the Kremlin or anything, but every good story has a good villain, and every good villain, deep down, believes they are right. Of course, I don't really mean to say that all Russians approve of this, because it's clear that the one making all the decisions here is Putin. My thesis for this video is that the President of Russia is going through a sort of blue scare, similar to the Red Scare on which the United States feared the expansion of the Soviet Union along with its communist ideologies. And I believe Russia is having a similar fear in regards to the West for the reasons I will explain in this video. Throughout its history from the Russian Empire to the USSR, Russia has been dominating the region of Eastern Europe. Eventually, with the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has lost a lot of power, influence, resources, people, and strategic land. The fall of the USSR has been coined by Putin as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Totally ignoring the world wars, but whatever. After all, Russia has lost its buffer states, which created a difficult position for Russia in case of a future war. Also, some of its former puppet states have joined the EU or NATO, leading the West to continue expanding eastward, leaving Russia in a potential vulnerable position. Now, as to Ukraine, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they have been leaning more and more towards the West. The majority of the population has a positive view on the West and consider joining the EU and or NATO a good idea. But Russia is having none of this. Ukraine and Russia do share a lot of history and culture, which is why Vladimir considers Ukrainians and Russians as one single people, similar to the US and Canada and Germany and Austria. But having Ukraine officially join NATO in the future would make a future intervention impossible, as war with one NATO member means war with all NATO members. Of course, Ukraine wasn't actually going to join NATO in the near future, but still this makes Russia pretty paranoid. And if ultimately in the near future Ukraine is seen as a democratic alternative to Russia, it would create a serious threat to Vladimir's authoritative regime. Vladimir wants to prevent a potential domino effect of westernization in the area, which is why he's so decisive on perhaps invading Ukraine to secure his own geopolitical interests. And of course, to further reinforce Russia's hegemony in the area, NATO and Russia have been negotiating. Russia laid down a series of demands to de-escalate the situation, those being that NATO stops expanding, withdraws troops from Eastern Europe, and rules out membership to Ukraine. The West, of course, is not going to accept this, as it's within Ukraine's rights to decide its own future. Now, the situation is a little bit more complicated. Ever since Putin recognized the sovereignty of Luhansk and Donetsk, he now claims that the Ukrainian government has always been conspiring against the ethnic Russians that live in the area. And now that these so-called new republics are allied with the Russian Federation, in theory, it would allow Russia to potentially build bases in the region and deploy troops. And maybe in the near future, Russia would blame Ukraine for attacking the new republics in order to conquer them back. This is a very delicate situation. Vladimir said they would mobilize troops into Luhansk and Donetsk. And on paper, they would have been invading Ukraine, as these two regions aren't part of Ukraine anymore, or so they say. But the only country that recognizes these new countries is Russia. And if Vladimir decides to mobilize troops into the internationally recognized border of Ukraine and Russia, then it's all gonna go down south. It's clear that the President of Russia is using this strategy as a sort of pretext of war, similar to how Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan excused their expansions in the first place. a neighboring country would allegedly attack them first, and well, I guess this gives them the right to go full imperial mode. But that's besides the point. An invasion of Ukraine is inexcusable. Russia keeps calling Ukrainians and Russians the same people. But all this situation isn't the right way to treat family either way. It's clear that Russia is acting on its own interests, with complete disregard to Ukraine's sovereignty. It's honestly a little scary to imagine what might happen next. But I guess only time will tell what Vladimir Putin might actually do. As I'm just starting out with my new channel, I would really appreciate you subscribing, liking, or commenting on this video to help it rank in the algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.